show. He's been on the show before, Joe Moglia. He is the chair of athletics at Coastal Carolina, and he's also, been a CEO. He's been a coach. He's worn a lot of hats in his career and wrote a fantastic op-ed yesterday in the Indy Star about the future of college athletics and in the wake of House versus NCAA settlement. Joe, thanks so much for joining us today. You got into details, I think, that you might have one of the more unique perspectives on all of this, having been in big business, having been in big college athletics, having been on the lower level of college athletics, coaching and all of that. When you saw all this come together with the House settlement, it appears that you kind of noticed that this is really a Band-Aid on a knife wound.
Well, Paul, I would agree. First of all, I'm delighted to be on. I'm a big fan, and from my end, I think the biggest issue that drives everything here is money. And I think the biggest concern that the NCAA has, and certainly the SEC and the Power Four in general, is that how much is this going to cost us? And the ultimate liability is going to be about $20 billion. And I think they feel they've got a home run because they were able to cut that by about 85%. It's a $2.7 billion settlement. Now, recognize, your listeners need to recognize that means that what we're trying to do here is go back and pay college athletes going back to 2016. Now, they have a formula for this where they're going to be able to figure out how to do that and how to pay a swimmer in 2016 versus a quarterback in 2020. But it doesn't solve the problems. The problem we've had for the last 3 years is that there's been a lack of leadership. And when the NIL was announced, literally a little over 3 years ago, the NCAA was nowhere to be found. Now, Charlie Baker was not the president then. Mark Emmert was. But that I've been on Wall Street and I've been in coaching for 5 decades, and I'm a big on leadership. And that to me was, the worst example of leadership I've ever seen. And consequently, since then, there's been nothing but chaos. So they're focused on the money. I understand that, but while they're focused on the money, they still have not been able to come close to solving the problem with regard to what's going on here, with regard to professional athletes, in effect, and amateur athletes. There are 565,000 athletes that involved with college athletics. About 2% of them get anything, let's say, more than $10,000, and 95% of them don't get anything. So we're making this very, very big deal about what's going on. Obviously, it's the upper realm. And I get that because of the money. I understand that. I'm a business guy. But we're not solving any of the problems. These problems still exist. And no matter what happens with the settlement, that's going to continue.
Joe, I love the argument that you make that the state of college sports would be better off with letting the NCAA go bankrupt. For this settlement not to go through, the NCAA has to go bankrupt. But the NCAA and really Power 5 leadership in selling this settlement to everybody else said, look, the NCAA is too big to fail, much like what we heard with banks back during the 2008 financial crisis, that if the NCAA fails, college sport fails. Why do you think that would not be the case if the NCAA were all of a sudden to go away or have to take a drastic change in just what exactly it is that they are responsible for within college sports?
I think the 2008, I was the CEO of TD Ameritrade, and I was very much in the middle of the financial crisis. Now, I'm not sure all the viewers necessarily understand how critical that was, but the financial crisis back then, at that moment in time, if the Federal Reserve and the Treasury of the United States didn't come in and get involved with this, there would have been a global recession, the likes of which would have been comparable, maybe worse than what we had in the 1930s. It was that serious, it was that significant, and we had to have the government come in and help out. Now, the place like Merrill Lynch, which I had worked for, and I'm very, very proud to be part of that. It was an $80 billion company. They had 60,000, 70,000 employees. They were in 47 different countries. And again, one of the greatest brands in the world. And they wound up, in effect, almost going under because of leadership doing a crappy job handling the balance sheet. That's a different discussion. So the Fed and the Treasury and the government, in fact, had Bank of America come in and take over. Now, the reason for that was because Merrill Lynch was considered too big to fail. If Merrill Lynch failed, literally failed, and went out of business, nobody helped them, that would have been catastrophic on a global basis. Catastrophic. Okay. Now, people talk about, the NCAA and trying to protect it all and comparing that to 2008. I put that a handful of times. That's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Because the NCAA is not too big to fail, and they've not done a great job managing themselves. Right now, college athletics is in chaos. So NCAA has a lot to do with that, and it needs to take responsibility for that. So if the NCAA went away, by the way, I was when the NIL was announced about over 3 years ago. Because the NCAA was not involved, I thought all college athletics should break away from the NCAA. Obviously, that didn't happen. Now I think Power 5 football should break away from the NCAA and handle what they need to handle on their own. So with the money at stake, with the liability of $20 billion could bankrupt the NCAA. And oh my God, what are we going to do? Well, the NCAA went away. The conferences take over, and within a year or two, everything will be fixed. And probably in a way that's better than what we're doing now. Right now, I think President Baker of the NCAA is doing everything he can to make sure that Power 5 football stays within the realm of the NCAA. But they're working so hard to be able to do that, and maybe that's ego, whatever the reasons are. But right now, we are professional student athletes, and we're trying to treat them the way we've always treated the rest of the student athletes over the span of the last 5 decades. That's not going to work.
You proposed splitting off into what you call the PCA, the professional college athletes, and the ACA, the amateur college athletes, and you could move, between the two. But again, you'd have to be recruited, like you said. But this would allow, the schools that are not going to ever be able to, because one, the big conferences, will take every chance they can to wall them off. And make sure they don't, or that they just are never going to be big enough to compete financially, to operate in a sphere that is acceptable to them. And then the other conferences and the PCA can put the pedal to the floor and do whatever they wish to do in making that, essentially a Fortune 500 company.
The Power 5 schools, the Power 4 schools, that I'm suggesting become the PCAA, Professional Collegiate Athletic Association, instead of the NCAA. They're not worried. They're not worried. They're not trying to prevent the rest of the schools, the Group of 5 schools, or the FCS and football, or the Division II, Division III. They're not trying to prevent them from doing anything. They're just focused on what's in their best interest. Well, what's in their best interest may not be in the best interest of the Group of 5 schools or other sports or Division II or Division III. So they're just focused on what they need to do for themselves. I get that. But if they're going to have professional student athletes, make believe this is a business. It's professional student athletes. It's a business. They don't even talk about academics. It's a business. So what's the best way to run a business? Well, why don't you look at business people in the sports world that have done a good job of doing that? NFL, NBA, NHL, et cetera. Not the NCAA. So if the more elite, let's begin with division, just kind of, for purposes of illustration, the Power 5, Division I, football, and men and women's basketball. If they're going to be professional, they got to break away and they got to run themselves the way a professional business would run themselves. If the NFL was running themselves the way college football is today, they'd go out of business, literally go out of business. So that's where we're headed. We're going down a bad road here. So if we had a PCAA, Professional Collegiate Athletic Association, they break away from the NCAA and they hire their own executive team that has real authority and autonomy, similar to the commissioner in the NFL, and they model themselves after the NFL. They have collective bargaining. They have salary caps. They have real contracts that matter, that are held up, and you go forward with that. Now, the rest of college athletics, frankly, stays the way it's been for the last 50 years. And if certain schools want to move up and become professional, there's no reason why they can't do that as long as they're qualified, as long as they're doing well enough to do that. If an individual athlete's good enough to get paid, great. But somebody's got to pay him. Somebody's got to. Today, there are a gazillion people that put themselves on the portal. 95% of them don't get a dime out of that. So if you're good enough to be recruited and you happen to be at the amateur level, the Amateur Collegiate Athletic Association, ACAA, well then if the PCAA recruits you, well great, then you move up, but you get away from this constant. Right now, everybody is a free agent every day, and everybody puts the name on the portal because they want to find out what the value is and how much they're going to get paid. And there are very few coaches Division I level, including ours. You go and you're recruiting a kid at the football level, and the family. The first thing they want to know is what's the NIL opportunity. So we have become professional sports in an area that has no experience running professional businesses. So break it apart, have the professional pieces run like professional athletics businesses, and the rest of the NCAA can stay similar to what it is, amateur athletics.
The settlement from a couple of weeks ago was filled with contradictions. Perhaps the biggest contradiction is allowing schools and athletics departments to pay their student athletes while also insisting that these student athletes are not employees of the university. How much of this do you think has to do with them trying to dodge the idea of short and long-term disability liability? And what else do you think is factoring into their desire to keep student athletes from ever being considered employees of their schools?
All of that, everything you're saying, Paul, is right on. Who cares what they're called? They're getting paid. They're professionals. There are other questions that are associated with that, and we're definitely going that direction. Are there are there benefits? What else is going on? Oh, we're going to have unions? Yeah, they're going to have unions. There got to be benefits. That's why it's a business. So that's why the NFL's got benefits. The NFL has pension plans. The NFL has medical support. The NFL has all those things. Well, that's what Professional Collegiate Athletic Association should be having. But we don't know how to run that. So they need to break away to be able to model themselves after somebody that knows what the hell they're talking about and do it that way. So all those things are part of a professional business, which NCAA is frankly is not qualified to be able to run. And we're too occupied with what's going on today and trying to manage today and not recognizing where college athletics is going to be 3 to 5 years from now. If you look down the road, this is very, very clear that the direction I think I'm talking about is the direction they're going to go.
How do you feel about private equity or private capital, as it's been called, at least in regard to college athletics, getting involved here? I think the fear is that somebody's program will be turned into Red Lobster. And the rosier side of it is just that you kind of have angel investors that are seeing an opportunity to help college athletics programs go. And the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle, but you've been in both sides of this. How do you see that working out? Because that feels a little inevitable in some reaches too, especially for schools that are, want to close the gap like Florida State and Clemson do between schools in the Big Ten and SEC who are making more money.
Okay, so the reality of this is that we're talking about asset management business in the financial world, Wall Street. That's where Wall Street comes into play here. Mm-hmm. And they see an opportunity where there's money to be made in an area where management doesn't know what they're doing and doesn't have any experience in it. So I said a minute ago, we're focused on today and how we're going to be able to handle our problems today and how we're going to pay our bills today, how we're going to make money today. Now, we're not focused on where we're going to be down 3 to 5 years down the road. A business cannot focus on what you're doing today. They got to focus on what you're doing today and how is it going to affect a year, 2, 3 down the road. So when private equity or private capital come in, what they're doing is they're seeing an opportunity to solve a near-term problem. Near-term problem is the respective schools need to be able to have more money NIL-wise to be able to pay their athletes. So not all of them have that. By the way, a lot of Power 4 have those. But a lot of the non-Power 4 schools don't have that. So how are they going to be able to help? Well, they're going to be able to help by provide money up front. They provide money up front. Guess what? They're not doing that for kicks. Otherwise, they're giving donations. Then they should just make contributions to the university, or just pay NIL directly. But what they're doing is they're doing this because they want to be able to get a return. So they're putting money up front with the expectation they're going to get a big return down the road. Now, If you're doing that at Ohio State, well, you know what? They make a tremendous amount of money in athletics. You probably did get a reasonable return. But Ohio State doesn't need private equity. Coastal Carolina does. All right, but the amount of money, we're very, very proud of what we do at Coastal. We're competitive. We handle ourselves. Again, we couldn't be prouder of who we are and what we're doing. But down the road, it's not like we're going to be making tremendous amounts of money. We're going to have difficulty giving them the return that, in effect, they would want, private equity or private capital. So I can appreciate if I'm on Wall Street, if I'm running Ameritrade, and I want to get involved with asset management, I want our people looking into this. But at the end of the day, I'm going to hold them accountable for a return down the road. And to me, that's a little bit of a question mark. Because we're really going to get a return, i.e. the more elite Power 4 schools, they don't need that. They don't need their capital.
Yeah, Joe, I'm glad you just mentioned all of that because I am a fan of one of those major Power 4 universities, and I thought it was despicable that the non-Power 5 schools end up on the hook for 60% of that 2.7, it's not the 60% of 2.7 billion, but the percentage that schools owe, the non-Power 5 schools owe 60% of that, with the Power 5 owing the other 40%, despite the fact that those non-Power 5 schools did not receive a vote in that settlement. That is unfair, and that's the NCAA and the Power 5s holding those schools hostage. So short of getting some massive windfall through private equity or some other funding source, do you see a lot of athletics departments either having to scale way back in terms of the sports that are offered or maybe disappearing altogether?
I think they need to be able to have a total refocus in terms of what's going on. That's why I'm suggesting that I think this is very clear in my head that there needs to be a separation. So if you want to run professional in certain sports, by the way, the Power 4 schools can have, again, as I said earlier, Paul, they can have, let's say, football and men and women's basketball. Well, the other sports don't have to be professional. So whatever's not professional can still report to the NCAA. So if you're an amateur, you report to the NCAA. All things are no longer problem. The issue is if you're going to get paid, you got to run it like a business. You cannot. If Power 4 that are getting paid. Talk about football for a second. Power 4 and football, if they're really truly getting paid and they're running themselves like a professional organization, they're going to have their own national championship. Then the rest of the schools have to have their respective national championships. It's not a level playing field. So why make believe? It is. It's not. Right. So therefore, pretty much 90% of college athletics can be run the way it's currently run and run effectively and run efficiently. But you can't. Do not make believe that that's going to be the same as what the professional sport's going to be able to do.
Joe, and this is the last thing before we let you go, and thanks so much for hopping on with us today. It's always an education when we get to talk to you. You mentioned having someone who knows how to run a business running college athletics. If that thing did happen, is that a job that you would like?
I think, you know what, I think I spent 25 years earning a living as a football coach and 25 years on Wall Street. And collegiate athletics and academic life, the world of college, world of university life, academics, the social part, the athletic part, all that really, really does matter to me. It's been a critical part of my life. And I want to see us get it right. If I were approached and had real autonomy, but I got to be, it's not going to be a committee. It's not going to be, I've got to bring people to approve things. The professional group that would want to go after this, if they wanted me, they would need to give me autonomy to make sure I do it the right way. And if I had something like that, I think I'd have to stop and seriously consider that. I don't see any of the leadership so far in college athletics moving in that direction at all. So I don't see that happening. But at some point in time, it will. If they think 3 years from now, they're going to start making better decisions today. But right now, all they're doing is trying to make sure that whatever their financial liability is going to keep it as minimal as possible.
Joe, thank you again so much. It's always great to lead off the show also with a fellow Italian. So I appreciate that a great deal. I loved what you wrote. It was very educational. It was as deep a dive into the nuts and bolts of something, as I think I've read the whole time this has been going on. Thank you so much. Enjoy the summer, and we'll talk to you again sometime.
So one of the things that our Italians have is that poor Trey never had an opportunity to open his mouth. Okay, so sometimes
he was there. He asked you. He asked you a couple. He asked you a couple.
Okay. Yeah. All right, guys.
All
Thanks,
right.
fellas.
Thanks, Joe.
Thanks, Joe.
All right. Bye-bye.